Lights out, chapter 41. I'll have to be doing some comments on a regular basis from here on out. All right. Mark had Jess take the boys inside the house. He showed the empty vial to Lisa and asked her what it was. Paxil is a strong antidepressant, she answered. Do you think she OD'd on them? No, I think she ran out. See here on the bottle? This was a 90-day script. It was filled almost 2 months before the burst. If she took it every day like she was supposed to, she would have run out a week ago. I don't know exactly how long it stays in your system after you stop taking it, but probably like 2 or 3 days. More than likely the benefits this gave her wore off about the same time Rodney was shot. No wonder she was such a basket case, Mark whispered, as if he didn't want Donna to hear him. Lisa's eyes began to fill with tears again. I'm so sorry I didn't know. I should have noticed the signs. If I had, maybe things would be different. We don't know that, Lisa. We don't even know how she died. Now, I need you to pull yourself together and figure it out, Mark said sternly. Okay, Mark, Lisa said as she sniffled one last time. She asked Mark to excuse himself while she examined the body. After a few minutes, she called Mark back in. There are no wounds or signs of anything physical. An overdose, whether intentional or accidental, is what makes the most sense. I looked through her purse, though, and there's nothing in it that she could have OD'd on. Maybe it's not in her purse, Mark suggested. That's possible, but I doubt it. Women keep their medicine in their purses, but let's look to make sure. The two of them looked through the tent but couldn't find anything Donna could have taken that would have killed her. If she didn't OD, then what else could have happened, Mark asked. Maybe she had an allergic reaction to the sedative I gave her, or even an insect sting, but I don't think so. There's no trace of any kind of reaction, and she obviously died very peacefully. Mark and Lisa stepped out of the tent. A few people had gathered around. Mark could see others coming up the street. The grapevine in Silver Hills had always been capable, but since the burst it had become a communication powerhouse. The speed at which this kind of news traveled was mind-boggling. Some of the residents would want to know what happened. Some would ask what they could do to help. Others were coming just because it seemed right to be with everyone else. Whatever their reasons, they came. After only a few moments, almost a third of the neighborhood was standing in Mark's yard. What happened, Mark? One of them asked. Donna Roberts died last night. How? We aren't sure. What can we do to help? Someone asked. Mark told them there was nothing they could do right now. He promised to let them know if something was needed. They asked about the boys and the arrangements. Someone suggested Rodney's funeral be postponed and that he and Donna be buried at the same time. Everyone agreed. People hung around and talked or prayed for a while, then headed back for their houses or duties. Don Wesley came up to Mark. I can't believe she's dead. We saw her last night. When? Right after our shift started. It must have been about 2:30. Who all saw her? All of us in Rover 2. She was walking toward your house. The funny part was she seemed happy. Lisa heard Don and asked him a question. Where was she coming from? I don't know. I thought she was just out for a walk. She was walking up the hill. Could she have been coming from the hospital, she asked. Yeah, I guess so. She was pretty close to there. Oh my God, Lisa started running toward the new hospital. Mark and Don followed her. When they got to the old Olson house, Lisa went straight to the kitchen. Mark saw that almost all of the cabinets were open and filled with various medical supplies and medications. On the counter were 3 bottles with lids off. Mark saw tears pouring out of Lisa's eyes again. Lisa started reading the bottles. One of these is diazepam. It's Valium. That's what I gave her last night to calm her down. I don't know what the others are, the tall blonde told the 2 men. Don, would you mind running over and getting Doc? Mark asked. Don nodded his head once and was gone. Lisa started to cry almost hysterically. Mark walked over to her and patted her on the back. She spoke to him 1 or 2 words at a time between the sobs. This is all my fault. She saw where I got the tranquilizer from. Lisa, this is not your fault. People make their own decisions, and even if the drugs did make it easy for her, she would have found another way if they hadn't been available. People always find a way to do what they want. I'm glad she did it with drugs instead of a bullet. Imagine how much more traumatic it would have been for her boys to see her with a hole in her head. Lisa paused for a second while that image sunk in. It seemed to slow her rate of crying for a moment. But she couldn't make good decisions in a depressed state. She needed her antidepressants to cope. It wasn't her fault. That may be true, but she knew she needed her medicine and chose not to tell anyone that she was out. She still made a choice. But you don't understand. I should have seen that she was in trouble. I am responsible for... Mark had had enough. Sam used to cry like this when she was little. He had a hard time dealing with it then, and he certainly couldn't deal with it now from a grown woman. He used the voice he employed when a 5 or 6-year-old was misbehaving in his karate class. It was calm, but authoritative in a you don't want to find out what happens next kind of way. Lisa, stop crying. I do understand. I understand that things are different than they were 6 weeks ago. Everyone has to take responsibility for themselves. We are now responsible to grow our own food, to protect ourselves, and a lot of other things we used to take for granted. You are the one who needs to understand these things. People are dying everywhere. We cannot help them all, especially if they don't try to help themselves. We're too busy trying to survive to nursemaid everyone. Mark realized he was started on a rant. He brought himself back on track. This was not your fault, and I don't want to hear you say it again. I don't want to hear you say it was again. Do you understand? Lisa's eyes were big as saucers. She nodded her head. It was all Mark could do not to bark. You say, yes, sir, to me when I ask you a question, like he would have to that miscreant 5-year-old. Fortunately, Dawn and Doc arrived just in time to break the tension. Hey, Doc, we've had some bad luck this morning, Mark greeted the vet somberly. Yes, Dawn told me. Let's see what she took. He walked over to the counter and picked up the first bottle. This one of diazepam. It's the same thing as Valium. This is Roboxone. It's a muscle relaxant, pretty strong one. And this is meperidine. It's basically Demerol. The three together would make a good euthanasia cocktail. You wouldn't feel anything. Just go to sleep, never wake up. It looks to me like she knew what she was doing. Either that or she was really lucky. The doctor blushed with embarrassment. I didn't mean, I guess I meant unlucky. It's all right, Doc. We knew what you meant, Mark assured him. They walked out of the hospital and talked about getting Chaparro to work on a big metal cabinet that they could lock the dangerous stuff up in. Doc said he would go talk to the welder right now. Mark looked at his watch. It was already time for his class. He walked over to his outdoor classroom and could see that no one was in the right frame of mind to practice self-defense. He dismissed the class and sent word that the afternoon class was also canceled. If he had been tired when his shift was over, he was exhausted now. He didn't know why. He hadn't done anything to tire himself out, but all he wanted was to go home and go to bed. He dragged into the house, drank a glass of water, and went to his bedroom. He was pulling his boots off. They must have weighed 20 pounds each when Jess came in. Mark, she was almost whispering. Yeah? About the boys. How are they, he asked, mad at himself for forgetting about them. I made them eat, and they cried themselves to sleep in the guest room. Mark nodded his head with his last ounce of energy. Have you thought about what's going to happen to them? No, he said flatly. Not because he was irritated, but because he was so tired. Why? Somebody has to take them, she answered softly. That only made sense. Mark nodded his head. Maybe the music teacher and his wife would want them. I think I know the perfect people to take them. Her voice softened even more. Mark looked at her. They have a lot of experience with children, and they have room for them, too, she smiled. She was selling him now. He knew the drill. He was supposed to ask who, but he was just too tired. Couldn't she see that? Didn't he have enough on his mind? He got angry. Damn it, Jess, just tell me who. He was instantly sorry. He could tell her, but it wouldn't do any good. She would get mad and stomp out of the room. At least he could go to bed in peace. He decided to apologize anyway. It was the right thing to do. I'm sorry, babe. I'm just really tired. He was surprised at her reaction. It's okay. I know you're really stressed out right now, but I think this is important. That's why I'm talking about it right now. A lot of people may want the boys, but we need to make sure they go where they have the best chance at a normal childhood. Okay, that makes sense. Who do you think should take them, he asked. Us. Mark didn't think he'd heard her right at first, but the look on her face told him that she had said exactly what he had heard. He started getting angry again. What? You heard me. Now her voice was forceful. I don't want you to decide right now. In fact, I don't want you to talk about it anymore right now. Just promise me you'll think about it. He cooled off instantly, and the last smidgen of strength drained from his body. He nodded his head. He finished stripping down to his underwear and somehow got under the sheets. I'll think about it. I promise. Wake me up in a couple of hours, will you? I don't know why I'm so tired. He closed his eyes and heard the door shut. That was the last thing he remembered. When his eyes opened, it took him a minute to come back to reality. When he did, he realized how refreshed he felt. He didn't know why, but he always slept better during the day, especially since the burst. Maybe it had something to do with being able to relax and not having to be on alert for danger like he felt he had to be at night. He looked at the clock and saw it was 2:45. He'd slept for over 4 hours. No wonder he felt so much better. He got out of bed and stretched. He owed his box $1, but he'd quit worrying about money. He'd quit carrying money a few weeks ago unless he was going somewhere. He looked around on the dresser and found some loose change. He counted out $1 in nickels and dimes and put them in the black box. Then he dressed and walked to the kitchen. Something smelled good. He could hear Jess in the living room reading a book. He looked and saw Lisa with Tommy, Timmy, and the twins listening intently to the adventures of Gulliver. The boys were snuggled into Jess, one on each side. Lindsay and Lacey were sitting on the love seat next to their mother. Jess looked happy to have someone to read to. He remembered how she used to read to Sam and David just like this, but they were, long ago, too big for such behavior. Jess really did want the boys. Her mother had told Mark before they were married about how Jess used to bring home every stray dog and cat in the neighborhood. She just had a need to nurture. But these boys were no stray puppies. They would need a lot of love and care to get past the terrible curve fate had thrown at them. Jess looked up and saw his head sticking around the corner. "Hi, honey. How was your nap?" "Wonderful. I thought you were going to wake me a little after noon." "I was, but you really needed some rest, and there was nothing important going on, so I decided to let you sleep. There's some food on the stove if you're hungry, and Alice made some cornbread. It's in the oven." "That sounds good. Where's Jim?" Lisa answered. "He's helping over behind the hospital." Mark knew she meant digging Donna's grave. He also noticed that if Lisa was mad at him for scolding her this morning, she didn't show it. "Thanks," he told the women, and then went into the kitchen to eat. Lisa came in a minute later. "I asked Tommy if his mom had ever worked at a veterinarian's office. He said no, but that she used to work for an animal doctor. Isn't that cute?" I guess that's how she knew what to take. Mark just nodded his head sadly, and Lisa went back to the living room. He ate and then headed down to see how the digging was going. The men had finished and were just standing around looking down into the 2 empty holes. One had been dug yesterday and one today. Mark stared down into the graves, and the enormity of their situation came rushing back in on him. He asked Jim if they could talk. The 2 men excused themselves and walked down toward the gate. "Jim, I need a favor. Anything. You just name it. I need you to stay here instead of going to Waco with me." "I thought you needed my truck." "I do," Mark explained, "but I need you to stay here. If something happens to me like it did to Rodney, and I don't get my family back from Waco, I need you to take care of Jess and the kids." "Nothing's going to happen to you, Mark," Jim said with conviction. "I hope you're right, but with how things are going, I don't think any of us knows what tomorrow holds. I can't risk something happening to both of us." "I guess I see the wisdom in that. If something happened to me, you'd take care of Lisa." "If something happened to me, you'd take care of Lisa and the girls, right?" "You can count on it," Mark promised.